my one and only demonic experience. Before I share this experience, I just need to throw something out there. I mostly use to post fictional horror stories I've written. However, I do also occasionally post my own true scary experiences. But to make the following paranormal experience of mine a little more credible, I've chosen to just write it out without caring how good or structured the writing is. Although I can't remember the exact year, it was either 2016 or 2017, when I was most likely 16 years old. I'd been living in the Republic of Ireland for just under 3 years, having moved from England. My family and I lived in the Midlands in a very small town. During my teenage years, because of how depressing my life was, mostly due to hating school, I regularly began believing and praying to God, naively thinking if I did, He would magically make my life better. Well, it was during this spiritual phase that I came upon a certain YouTube video. The video was about a man who had apparently been brought by Jesus to hell, and while he was there, Jesus showed him all kinds of eternal horrors. From what I can remember, the man saw the souls of people being tortured and burned alive by demons or something. Well, after experiencing this, the man then wakes up in his bed, as though from a dream. However, the man claimed what he experienced wasn't a dream at all, but a real experience of what happens to sinners in hell. Although I didn't know if what this man experienced was real or not, it definitely made me terrified of ever spending eternity in the fiery depths of hell. However, not long after watching this video, I suddenly felt very unsettled. Not because of the video I just watched, but to my memory, I almost felt as though I was now being watched while supposedly alone in my bedroom. But not only did I feel like I was being watched, I also felt like I was somehow in danger, so much so that I leave my room to go downstairs, as that's where my parents and sister were. Now, what comes next is the real scary part of this experience, because as soon as I reach down the stairs before I could enter any room, I feel a hard physical tap on the back of my shoulder, where I then literally turn around and scream. No word of a lie, I screamed. But when I turn around, there isn't anyone or anything there, as though a ghost had tapped me on the back. Also worth mentioning is that I had screamed so loud that my mum was now shouting me from the living room, asking what was wrong. For the rest of that evening, I remember being very afraid and skittish, that every noise or movement I heard had me incredibly paranoid. In fact, I was so skittish that whenever my dog, who was still just a small puppy at the time, came up to me, I was afraid of her touching me. Living in this house for only a few more months before moving, I never had another experience like this one, nor have I since. Although I've always been a fan of scary stories, real and fictional, I basically know little to nothing about demons or ghosts, as I find aliens and a lot more interesting. I'm not sharing this story to prove it was a real paranormal experience. Maybe it wasn't. But if there's anyone reading this who knows anything about demonic experiences or similar experiences of the supernatural, I would really like to hear your thoughts. Who knows? Maybe the whole thing was just a psychological reaction from watching a video about hell being real. However, after sharing this story, I do have to admit something for the sake of being honest. I do also believe I had a real UFO experience when I was around 11, which I've already written about, no joke. I saw an actual flying saucer from my bedroom window. I already know mentioning this UFO experience doesn't help my credibility regarding my alleged demonic experience, but at least I'm being honest and not holding anything back. Whether you believe I had a demonic experience or not, if you don't, that's fine. If anyone can help me out with what I experienced, even if the whole thing was most likely psychological, I would really like to hear your thoughts. Also, for anyone wondering why I haven't shared this story sooner, since I've already written about my other scary experiences, I think it's just because I already wrote about my UFO experience and doubted anyone would believe I also had a demonic one. Anyways, thanks for reading. an incident I have no logical explanations for. So this story is not told often in our family, and when someone mentions it, the ones who do know get it. My grandmother died on May 14 this year, and she told me this story back in 2021. She was 82 back then. I had brought 2 of my friends over, and we were young and very curious to play horror games. The house is very big, and only 2 people lived there, my great-grandma, my father's maternal grandmother, and her daughter-in-law. So it was pretty private, and we were allowed to do whatever we wanted. To give you an idea, here's the layout of the house's first floor, because it is the floor where the incident happened. It's on the comments. The staircase on the right leads downstairs. The one on the left leads upstairs. Chiku means small in Kannada. Our native language, it's a very old language spoken in South India. Since the house is at least 80 years old, the building style is very ancient, and the space left blank is open space with no roof. It's partially like a terrace, but it has really long walls covering each side. Back to the story. Me and my FRNDS were playing in the open area. It's the blank spaces in the drawing of the first floor, and suddenly I got an idea to play Bloody Mary. So in the Chiku room there were 2 mirrors on parallel sides of the wall opposite to each other, and I decided that it was the best place. I convinced my FRNDS to play it. One of my FRNDS was very brave and didn't believe in all the ghost stuff, but the other one was very spiritual and orthodox. I somehow convinced the orthodox one to play. We stood in front of the mirror and said it thrice. I told her to not open her eyes or Bloody Mary would haunt her forever, and her being the scaredy cat she was opened her eyes and screamed. As soon as she screamed, we all opened our eyes. She told us that she saw a lady wearing a sari, didn't mention the color though. My Ada Ava. I used to call her that because she was my dad's aunt and my grandma. That's what my actual grandma used to say. Well, Indian people don't usually call their grandmas, paternal side, second elder brother's wife but since our family was Kannada, not entirely Kannada though, since we lived in Tamil Nadu, we speak in a slang that is mixed with Bajuga and a lot of other languages. Well, she heard that scream since it was very loud and came upstairs. She found all of us in that room. As far as I know, the Chiku room has been used as a store room, and she has warned us not to go there since it is dirty. It was not the real reason they did not want us there though. We said we were sorry and went on about our day. This happened in the evening. My FRNDS left about an hour later, and since I was in my grandmother's house, I need to leave to my own in an hour. So I decided to spend some time with my great-grandmother and go, since if I took the 2-minute walk to my house right, then I would be told to do my homework. I changed my mind and went to play video games there itself after I reached the ground floor though. And when I went to take the game from the living room, my great-grandma, who was sitting there, called out to me. She told me she had heard from my Ada Ava what I did, and that she was not okay with me doing it again. We were chatting on, and at one point she started telling me why she didn't want me in that room. This where the actual story begins, and I will be narrating it the exact same words she used. It was the late 1980s when it happened. Back then in that house, my great-grandmother, her husband, I'm told he is a very strict person, her second son, my Ada Ava's husband, who later committed suicide in 2011, and my dad, who was 5 or 6 at that time. My father's uncle was unmarried at the time, so my Ada Ava wasn't there yet. It was late at night, about 9 o'clock, but back then we allowed kids to play till a bit later into the night. Your father's FRND, our neighbor, had just finished her homework and had come to play with him. He went up to get his toys, which were in the cupboard in front of the Chiku room. It had just been exactly 7 days since my mother, my father's great-grandmother, died, and she used to stay in the Chiku room. I had kept the door closed since she just died, and your father told me later that when he went up, the door was wide open. He didn't mind it and was searching for his toys. Then he told me he heard my mother calling him. He turned around and saw her sitting in her chair in the exact middle of the room. Keep in mind that the chair, the exact same chair, was the one your grandfather was eating in down. I was giving him doses, and he was sitting in that exact same chair that we had brought down because she had died. When someone dies, they tell us to throw away all their belongings. We had gone against the elders and kept that chair. Well, her father told me she was sitting in that chair, and she had called him Fn Liba Kani, which basically means Fn dear, come here, but in a very loving manner. My father, since he was very young, had no idea that she had died just 7 days back. His thought process was, that lady who is always there hasn't been for a few days. I really liked her. And when he saw her, oh, that nice lady. He went to her and she had asked him how his day went and if he had eaten. Since he was just about to play with his friend, he said no, and that his grandma told him to eat after he finished playing. Then he told that my mother, who was 72 at the time she died, had magicked a dosa and chicken curry out of nowhere and started feeding it to him. She had made him sit on her lap as soon as he entered. She started slow at first, feeding very lovingly and slowly, but then she began to feed him faster and faster and faster and faster until she was stuffing him so much at one point that he started choking. He had retaliated, but she hadn't stopped. She kept stuffing him with a smile on her face. He was screaming a bit louder by now. At one point he thought he was gonna die, so he screamed very, very loud. I heard it from the kitchen downstairs. Since it is a big house, you won't be able to hear the noise you made in the chiku room in the kitchen. I ran upstairs as fast as I could to find your father lying on the ground in the exact middle of the room facing the balcony, crying and choking, struggling to breathe. I was shocked and I helped him to calm down. Your great-grandfather had followed me upstairs and also started helping him. I picked him up and was about to walk out the room when I was the chair, the one your great-grandpa was sitting in a few seconds ago. My mother's chair that we kept against the elder's advice was there in the room, facing one of the mirrors. I looked at my husband to find him looking at the chair with the same horrified expression. Till the very day she died. She had always warned me not to go in that room whenever I was over, which was basically every day. She even told me when she was on her deathbed. She had lost her memory and was struggling to recognize even her daughter. But she told me not to go in the room even on the day she died. This is very scary, cause how can someone who forgot their own daughter, not due to dementia, it was old age, remember to warn her great-granddaughter not to go to a very particular room in the huge house. I think maybe that wasn't the only thing that happened in the room. Maybe something more horrifying had happened there. Maybe it held more significance than being the center for the incident. Maybe she had seen something more terrifying herself. But I guess we will never know since she isn't here anymore. She knows every nook and corner of the house since she is the person who has spent the longest time in it, 75 years. And she was terrified of that room. I remember the night she died. It was on the 14th of May this year, 2025. They had taken her to the hospital based on my uncle's, who is great doctor but not her usual one. He doesn't know her history ig. Her actual doctor had advised us not to take her though, advice. She had a checkup there and they told my father and my uncle, they were the only ones there, that she won't make it. She died on her ride back home. They told me she had asked for me before she lost consciousness. I was her favorite ig. Time of death was 5:55. I remember this vividly as I had thought about her every day at the same time for the next few months. That night I stayed there in the bedroom near the staircase on the right since we had to do to the funeral rituals. I had a dream. I remember sighing myself to sleep next to my father. In that dream, I'm not 100% sure it was a dream though. I was sleeping in the exact same position and the one side of the door was open. My great-grandma walked in with ease. She had always been struggling to walk in my memory, and sat near my leg on the bed. It was a wide one so the person next to me didn't wake up due to the disturbance. She said, "Canny, manageth ya," which translates to "Dear, have you slept?" And then she told me to not go into the chiku room and walked out through the balcony door. I woke up as soon as she walked out. I was sad, so I sat up on the bed and called out at my father, who was supposed to be sleeping beside me. My uncle, great-grandma's second son, woke up. I was confused, but never mind that. He asked me if I was okay and what had happened. I told him. He told me not to think too much and sleep. I did. Before sleeping, I had opened my phone to check Instagram and saw the time. 3:44. That exact time is said to be Brahma Muhurta, the only time of the day where the veil between the dead and the humans is the thinnest. I told my grandma and Adi Ava, who both told me not to mention the Chiku room part to my other relatives. My other relatives told me about the significance of the time, and that this is when the soul will be taken to heaven, and that she had walked out the balcony, so she wanted to talk to me before she went forever. I wonder what she saw in that room that made her warning about the room, the last words she told her favorite person. The Foundry and the Fire-Faced Man. Good evening. I am not a writer in any type of way. This story is based on a day of events which happened to me. I hope you all have a great new year. P.S. I changed the names around for privacy purposes. The Foundry and the Fire-Faced Man. Inspired by true events. Written by Christopher Joyce. 210425, 60625. The day had drained everything out of me, body, mind, and soul. 12 hours inside a dead steel foundry will do that to you. The place was a relic, a monument to another era, and it felt like the walls themselves resented being disturbed. Rust bled down the iron beams, ancient chains hung like forgotten nooses from the ceiling, and a constant chill snaked through the air despite it being late spring. It was the kind of job we dreaded, cold, dark, and remote. No phone signal in half the building, no real lighting, just three of us working with our own tools and torches, me, Harry, and Ethan. We were the only ones assigned to the site. By the time I slumped down on a stack of insulation rolls to eat my dinner, I felt like I could close my eyes and never wake up again. That's when I heard it. Connor. A voice from below, loud, urgent, Harry's voice, no doubt in my mind. I stood up, dusting off my high-vis, and leaned over the metal railing of the mezzanine. Harry, I called back. No response. I waited, frowning. The foundry's lower level stretched out like a cavern, barely touched by the dying daylight leaking through cracked windows. It must have been over 100 meters long, a mess of rusting steel, forgotten machines, and shadows that never seemed to move. Harry, I shouted again, my voice bouncing back at me. Still nothing. I decided to check. Maybe something had happened. Maybe Harry had fallen, or worse. I made my way down the metal stairs, every step groaning beneath me. As my boots hit the concrete floor, I saw it. A figure. At the far end, half-lit, human-shaped. Too far to make out details, but definitely standing, definitely watching. Harry, is that you? The figure stepped sideways into the dark. My stomach twisted, but logic spoke louder. It's Harry or Ethan, probably just pissing about. That's when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Harry, you want anything from the shop? Me and Ethan just left, be back in 10. I froze, my blood ran cold. I tapped the answer button with trembling fingers. You've just left. Yeah, like 20 minutes ago. We're grabbing food. Why? My heart was thudding now. Are you sure no one else is on site? We locked the gate behind us. You're the only one there, mate. I looked back toward the far end of the foundry. The figure was standing there again. Closer. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, sprinting up the stairs 2 at a time, lungs burning, ears ringing. I didn't stop until I was outside, hunched over the gravel, eyes on the shadows behind the steel door. I waited for Harry and Ethan to return before saying a word. They laughed it off. You're losing it, mate, probably just tired. I forced a laugh too, but my skin never stopped crawling. That night, after a hot shower and a late dinner, Things began to feel normal again. I laid in bed in the room I shared with my two brothers. My sister slept across the hall. Everyone was home. The house felt safe. I threw on a bit of YouTube to wind down, then closed my eyes. Just for a second. When I opened them, I was still in bed, still looking at the ceiling. But the color had drained from the world. Everything was black and white, silent, as if time itself had been paused. I tried to move. Nothing. Panic flared in my chest. My heart thudded. I tried to call out to my brothers, to my mom, to anyone, but my lips wouldn't part. My body was frozen, paralyzed, and I knew this wasn't just a dream. A chill breeze swept across my face, though the windows were shut. Goosebumps prickled my arms. That's when I noticed the light. A bright, sharp glow cutting through the thin crack between my wardrobe and the door. It didn't flicker like a bulb. It didn't stretch or scatter like normal light. It simply existed, like a blade. Then the thing stepped out from behind the wardrobe. It didn't walk. It shifted. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too bent, and its body was void of light, a living shadow. It absorbed the black and white around it, becoming a hole in the world itself. But its face, if you could call it that, was fire. Not a comforting glow. It was white-hot agony, a violent flame, as if someone had ripped the sun from the sky and jammed it into a human skull. But the light didn't illuminate the room. It just burned. My eyes locked onto it. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. It grew bigger and bigger, not by moving, but by being, expanding, devouring the space between us. Then came the scream. In my left ear, right beside my face, a scream tore through the silence. "Help me, CONNOR, help." My sister's voice. Blood-curdling, raw, like she was being ripped apart. She screamed my name over and over again, each word full of horror and pain and panic. She was dying. I could hear it, could feel it. I tried to scream back. Nothing. I sobbed, but no tears came. I prayed, bargained, begged. The fire-faced figure stared through me and grew until the light consumed everything. Then darkness. A blink. I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. My body shook violently. I screamed out for my mother, sobbing like a terrified child. My brothers stirred. My mom came running. I told them what happened, every terrifying second of it. They listened, they believed me, but they didn't understand. My sister safe, asleep. Everyone else fine. But I was. The sleep paralysis returned a few more times over the following months. Short, shallow, the vision stopped. The entity never came back. But I never went back to that foundry. And I never forgot the fire-faced man. Now, over 2 years later, the memory is etched into the corners of my mind like ash on stone. Most days, I don't think about it. Life moves on. But sometimes, when I'm exhausted, when I'm back on the tools, alone in the dark, I wonder, was it just sleep paralysis? Or did something follow me out of that building? And more importantly, did it ever leave? I worked the night shift at a cemetery. One night, I was assigned to dig my own grave. I worked the night shift at a cemetery. One night, I was assigned to dig my own grave. I've worked as a cemetery groundskeeper for 4 years now. Hillrest Memorial Gardens, about 60 acres, old enough that some of the headstones are barely readable anymore. Most people think that kind of job would get to you, but it never did. Night shift is quiet, peaceful, even. The dead don't complain, don't judge you, don't make small talk. At least that's what I used to believe. I work Tuesday and Thursday nights, 10:00 p.m. to 6:00 a.m. My supervisor, Glenn, usually hands me the work orders before heading home. That Thursday night was no different. 3 graves to dig in Section G before the rain hit. Routine work. By a little after midnight, I'd finished 2 of them. I was heading back to prep for the 3rd when my phone buzzed with an email from the cemetery's administrative system. Urgent additional work order. That happens sometimes. Unexpected deaths, last-minute scheduling changes. I opened it without thinking. Plot G51. Service time, Friday 10:00 a.m. Name David Reyes. My name. Same spelling, same middle initial. My birth date was listed correctly too. What stopped my breathing was the death date the day before. I assumed it was a glitch, a sick coincidence, but then I noticed the family contact number. It was my mother. I tried calling Glenn. Voicemail, tried the admin office, no answer. It was nearly 1 a.m. I told myself I was being stupid and drove over to plot G51 just to prove it wasn't real. The grave was already dug. 6 feet deep, clean edges, fresh dirt piled neatly beside it. A temporary marker stood at the head of the plot with my name, birth date, and death date printed neatly on it. I don't remember backing away, only realizing I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. Then the emails started coming in. One every few seconds. More work orders, more names, Glenn, an admin assistant, a few regular visitors I recognized, all with death dates in the coming days, all scheduled for burial. I turned my phone off and tried to leave. That's when I saw lights on in Section M, excavator lights. Glenn was there digging, or at least someone who looked exactly like him. Same uniform, same posture, but his movements were wrong, stiff, empty. He didn't respond when I shouted his name. Then another excavator started. Then another. All across the cemetery. As I ran past Section G, I looked at the graves I'd dug earlier. 2 of them were empty. Mine was. Someone was lying in it. Me. Same clothes, same boots, even the tear in my sleeve from the fence I caught it on the week before. When I blinked, the grave was empty again. I locked myself in the maintenance building and called 911. While I waited, I watched the security monitors. The excavators were still running. No operators. Another email came through. One of the names belonged to the responding officer. Death time listed down to the minute. 20 minutes later, I watched his cruiser lose control on the wet grass and wrap itself around an oak tree. Everything after that feels distant, like I was already gone. I quit the next day. Glenn's wife told me he'd died that night, heart attack while driving home. The others followed. Every name from those emails showed up in the obituaries within days. That was 3 weeks ago. I never went back to Hillrest. My mother and I left town. I deleted the email account tied to the cemetery system. But my work order is still burned into my memory. According to it, I died Wednesday night. My funeral was scheduled for Friday morning. I didn't attend. So technically, I'm already dead. And lately, I've been dreaming of that grave again, lying there, staring up at the sky, and feeling like I forgot something important. Like someone is still waiting for me to come back and finish my shift. I was almost kidnapped as a kid once. This is my first time posting, and this is a brand new account but not throwaway. I will contribute more in different corners of Reddit. Obviously, names of people I know as well as myself have been changed. I was about 7 or 8 years old when this all happened, possibly even younger, but I doubt it. Also, trigger warning. Nothing too graphic, but I do talk about kidnapping, human trafficking, and mentions of being abused. It isn't a very long story, but it happened. It is also a good introductory story to the weird and crazy stuff I've lived through. So to start this particular story, I will give some small backstory. For one, my parents divorced when I was young. My biological father was physically and emotionally abusive. Like I said, they split early, so I don't remember much of it. However, this abusive mentally shifted hard after the split and transferred into him consistently threatening my mom to kidnap me. Even though this is a story of when I was almost kidnapped, Bio Daddy didn't do it this time, or any time luckily. There was a time we thought he was actually attempting, but who knows if he actually was or not. No, this was way more anticlimactic and dull. Again, a good starting point. This started like any other evening when my parents and their friends got together. My best friend was their son, and my early days crush was his little sister. Again, we were all in grade school, so the dynamics on this weren't too serious, nor are they pertinent to this story. They will be important in details on a later story, however. Yes, I will be elaborating on some things over various stories, all over Reddit, in the appropriate subreddits. Some of my stories are creepy, dealing with subjects regarded in a traditional sense of real, while some are supernatural. So to avoid issues, I will split these stories up and post them in respective subreddits. Me and my friend Alan are hanging out at his house. His family, which was his mom, his stepfather, his younger sister, lived in a basement apartment to the house of his grandparents, on the main floor, and various pets over the years. We did our usual, which at the time of the late 90s was play outside in his backyard and woods behind their house. We usually did this till about a little past dark. The darker it got, the closer to the driveway we would migrate our play. So dusk was settling in, and we were almost to the fence that separates the backyard from the driveway. The driveway which sat beside the house and in front of the detached garage. This was our barrier that separated the dark abode that was the shaded, tree-covered grove, known as the backyard. In the day it is perfect, nice and shaded, and plenty of privacy for a few little kids to play without being seen by random people driving by in the desolate part of the country town he lived in. At night, this fence was our emotional barrier against the overtly creepy projection of the aforementioned backyard, allowing us to play the few minutes of the warmly lit nighttime driveway without seeing the backyard. However, we would have to brave it for a few minutes just before coming inside, as the door to their basement apartment was a few feet from the gate in the fence. The side yard, i.e. the driveway, was lit up by a warm old-school street lamp that his grandfather must have installed himself decades ago. However, the backyard was pitch black save an odd street lamp that was fixed to a power pylon that sat in a field beside the forest. Where the field is located and the angle it runs put the light seemingly in the middle of the woods from our perspective. This lit up and projected mangled silhouettes of trees and bushes through the small section the light cast. This was the defining feature that added to the rest of the backyard qualities, that gives it the especially unsettling appearance at night for us. We continued to play and chit-chat. One of our favorite things in the world was to exchange stories, much like the ones on this subreddit. So our usual, especially as it got darker, was to try and get each other unnerved before we had to sprint through the small stretch of the backyard to the back door. Even more so was to hope the adults didn't lock it behind them, leaving us banging on the door frantically till one of the adults answered, jokingly picking on us for our zealotry against the monsters and shadows of our imagination. Aptly jittery on edge, yet grinning ear to ear, we both commence our sprint through the backyard. Just as we come to the door, Alan realizes his bike's still out in the backyard. He takes off sprinting towards it, so I naturally follow before realizing what he was running after. We get to his bike, which at this point was parked under a large tree in which the branches fanned out and touched the ground all around. This forced us to have to crouch, and thus our sprint slowed to a normal pace of trying to execute the one last chore before we could go inside. At this point, we both realized we were being jittery due to our own fun earlier, and settled down, walking his bike back to the garage. We stop for a brief moment as we come out from under the tree. Frozen, we both stand staring. Our feet stop dead in their tracks, my left foot trailing in process of coming off the ground to then place in front. Directly in front of us they stood, between us and the one gate and sort of blocking the back door, two fully grown, adult-sized silhouettes. For a brief moment my heart stopped. I thought, okay, under the tree then break for the woods. That's as far as my mind got because as I started to form the thoughts of grabbing Alan and dragging him with me. The two strangers opened up. "Come on, boys, we're going to get dinner." It was his mom. We both relaxed and headed closer, and as we did they shifted direction and moved into the light behind them. Clearly his mom and my mom. We both laughed at each other and ran after them. Alan returned his bike and I followed the adults to the car. We sat waiting as Alan disappeared into the garage with his bike. Waiting a few seconds, then a minute. Alan was still in the garage, out of sight. Both adults then remarked on how long he was taking. So his mom, Trish, unbuckles and opens her door to get out of the car. Just as she did, Alan comes running out and hops into the other side. "You good?" Trish asks him, to which he responds that he knocked over some things with his bike and needed to fix them. So alas, we leave to get our dinner. Leaving the stepfathers behind, we make the short trip into my home city, which sits right beside the country town Alan lives in. So the city I live in and grew up in was for a while sat on the FBI's top 10 most dangerous cities. We held a pretty sizable epicenter of actual murders and criminal activity associated with the Satanic Panic. Our city is host to horrors and stuff of this nature since like 3 name changes and 100 years or more ago. Look up Lizzie Borden, realize that defined the current of the city's soul, even till now. Then you get it. Even now, after returning like 18 years of living elsewhere in the country, this city is still pretty spicy. I'm not going to lie. However, it was way more wild when I was younger. Nowadays, its remaining vestiges of gang and drug activity mixed with extreme gentrification forcing the poverty-lived to shift again. Dragging us right back to how it was circa this story. Irony is subtle but powerful. We arrive at a restaurant in the more traveled part of town, sort of the gateway into the city, alternate the interstate. It is also a major traffic route no matter the time of day due to it being a major artery for this entire area of the state. So for all intentions, it should be a very safe spot of the city to be in at the time. Most people were on their way home from work. Plenty of pedestrians and people around and about. So due to the time that this took place, me and Alan were just left in the car. Mind you, I am older, not going to allude to my exact age. However, this was normal and almost no one batted an eye about this back then. So no, our mothers were never neglectful. It was normal. We were instructed to lock the doors behind them and not to open it for anyone except them. So there we were sitting in his mom's old station wagon, in the parking lot of an old-school New England City bar and grill. For those of you who don't know what that is, as I've lived in different places all over the country, most bar and grills are usually some sort of restaurant, sit-down style. Often family-friendly with some generic toned-down, flashy or dull franchise-type bar attached to it, like Applebee's or Chili's or something like that. Well, in New England, before the explosion of chain bar and grills, we had real ones. This could have been the same everywhere else for all I know. However, so this was a true bar that had a small, not family-friendly sit-down spot more akin to a small cafe, except with booze, and the restaurant side of this was definitely an afterthought. This definitely was not a family-friendly chain, and the parking lot was not exactly a normal parking lot. More like a small driveway for what was probably the apartments above the bar. So it wasn't right on the street, but it wasn't hidden either. So the parking lot, still kind of sketch, kind of not. Either way, the ball's on this guy. It wasn't broad daylight, but again, very well-traveled, busy part of a city. Lit up like it was daylight, by numerous street lights, city lights, and a host of other lighting. This man just straight up walks up to the car. Doesn't try to communicate with us through the windows, doesn't ask us to unlock the door or anything. He didn't care that there were multiple adults floating in and out of the bar like a revolving door. He certainly didn't care that less than 20 feet away from him, there were multiple people walking up and down the sidewalk. His hand reached for that door handle and he went for it. Failure on all 5 doors, yet he still tried and tried. This went on for several minutes. I'm not sure how long, as for one, there was no cell phones. For 2, I was not thinking about time at this point. We sat there frozen. I didn't feel scared like you would think. Obviously, my body reacted. I felt the fight or flight kick in and my mind was racing. Yet his goofiness and general brazen clumsiness just sort of baffled me. This man was really trying to kidnap us. It blew my mind and I didn't know how to react. He tried and tried each of the doors, several times each. Then as sudden as it came, he stopped, walked off and disappeared into the hive life form, that is the population of the city. Never again saw this man a day in my life. I routinely checked the local sex registry boards at the police stations and such around the city. For other reasons, for another story in an appropriate subreddit not here. However, suffice to say, in my attempt to keep eyes on someone else in those boards, I never once came across an image of this man again. This city has seen a lot of kidnappings and similar crime. It was also an epicenter of and still is an epicenter of human trafficking. So for all I know, he could on to have hurt someone else or kidnapped someone else. I never saw anything in the news immediately after. I'm completely unsure what truly happened after. Was he just some weird sicko looking to use us? Or was he trying to grab us to sell into one of the local rings? At the time, this was just a weird occurrence. My family didn't downplay it nor took it lightly by no means. We recognized it for what it was, and not until I was much older was I ever left alone in the car like that again. Soon after this, it became the new norm for the whole of our country to no longer leave kids in the car, although that seems to remain a problem and often still is. That is the story of when I was almost kidnapped, the first time. It was the time in which we were 100% certain as to yes, I just escaped some bad shit. The other time was a little bit more nuanced. Anyway, thank you for reading my story. If you liked it, stick around and visit my profile, I'll have more. I have lived a very colored life and tried a lot of different things. I have lived and or traveled all over New England, the Pacific Northwest, Appalachia, Florida, and more. I'm a combat veteran, domestic violence survivor, and more. I have survived Baghdad, infiltrating a neo-Nazi organization and helped bring it down from the inside along with some other proactive anarchists. I cannot sit still with my life and live by the norm, so I have seen and lived a lot. I have no interest in personal clout and will do everything I can to keep my identity secret. I am sharing this because I feel it is time I tell my story somehow, some way. Even if it's just therapy for me. Most of what I am posting hasn't been revealed to anyone except a few past partners and the people involved. Black Magic in Beauty Pageants, a cautionary tale. This story reveals the dark side of beauty pageants and the superstitions behind them. So this story is from a Thai senior I know. About 20 years ago, when she was still in university, she saw her friend Gina's name listed for a beauty pageant. But a week later, Gina's name just vanished from the list. Curious, my senior called Gina's best friend Thea, and what Thea told her was way darker than she expected. So Gina and Thea were best friends. Their houses were very close to one another, and they practically grew up together. Gina was really beautiful and would always get picked to participate in school activities to represent her school. This would be the school's traditional dance showcase, marching bands, beauty pageants, etc. Basically, if it required a pretty face, Gina was in it. Her mom loves to boast about her daughter's beauty, and as Gina grew older, her mom made her take many extracurricular courses like body language development, dancing, music after school, so the poor girl didn't really have time to socialize and play with her friends. Gina's grades started dropping, but her mom didn't mind. She wanted Gina to enter the entertainment world. Soon, mom's training got more intense. Gina had to be on a strict diet to keep her figure. Teen beauty pageants were pretty easy for Gina. She won many awards. But when she entered the ones for adults, Gina started losing. Her mom could not accept this failure and resorted to cursing at her and pressured her to win, as the mom had invested a lot in her. So sometime later, Gina's mom was venting this problem at the salon, and her hairdresser told her that Gina was losing, because she was probably the only one playing fair. Pageants these days don't just rely on beauty. They run on kunsai, so in Thai, it means the use of occult items and black magic such as cursed oils, enchanted charms, forbidden rituals. If the mom wants Gina to win, she'll have to use those charms too. The mom was eager to try this and was recommended a medium. For cultural context, mediums are pretty common in Thailand, and they usually channel entities such as the deceased or local spirits to offer advice on health, finances, or relationships. Some are good, some are bad. Some are legit, some are just a scam. When the mom visited this medium, the medium showed her pictures taken with many popular celebrities and told the mom that without the medium, they wouldn't have gotten so popular. Blinded by the desire to win, whatever the medium told the mom to do, she happily agreed. When Gina got to the medium's place, she had to be in some sort of ritual. A red powder dabbed her head, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, her body moved on its own, performing a graceful traditional dance she'd never learned. After the ritual, instead of feeling scared, Gina herself felt more confident, more assured, as if she had gained a superpower. This time she entered the pageant again, but this time, she actually noticed that all the other contestants had some kind of charms or amulets with them. Some would pray to those amulets before getting on stage. Some would put amulets into their hair, confirming the fact that beauty pageants do truly use such trickery. This time, Gina actually made it through the final rounds, but still hadn't won the crown yet. So this mom and daughter sought after more powerful charms and amulets without even looking at the price. It has gotten to the point where if you open Gina's bag, amulets would come gushing out of the bag, and whenever she competed, she didn't feel alone. She felt her mannerism, posture, and walk all changed on their own. Then, Gina started winning in the regional rounds, but when she entered the national round, she failed. Her mom was furious, so Gina went to find more mediums online without telling her mom. She found one online who had tons of good reviews, so she contacted the new medium. "What level do you want?" asked the medium. Gina replied, "I want the strongest one." When she arrived, she saw that the medium was rather young, unlike most mediums who are usually on the older side, so a ritual was performed. The medium placed gold foils all over her body but. Even after this, Gina still hasn't won on a national level. The cycle of searching for new mediums continued, and Gina found a new medium. This time round, the medium, a male, seemed more legit than the previous one, as he even had an actual shop in a shopping mall. This medium told her to get a set of strong amulets called Epur and Ai and Gang, which are a set of female and male amulets to attract intense charm, love, devotion, used a lot for romance and business settings. Usually with these items, owners are more likely to draw lovers, boost sales, or ensure loyalty too. But this is where it got really dark. The medium told her that to activate the amulets properly, she had to sleep with him, and he added that the effects were only temporary. They need to maintain constant intimacy for the power to keep working. Gina froze. This couldn't be real. But her mom's voice kept echoing in her head. "You have to win. We've invested everything in you." With the constant pressure from her mom and feeling like she had no way out, Gina agreed in desperation. At this point, when Thea told my senior this, she was like, "OMG, what the hell? This is absolutely disgusting." I'm not gonna go into much detail of this ritual as it's too explicit, but yeah, after this ritual, Gina made it to the national rounds. Gina even advanced to the final 20 contestants. That was when my senior saw Gina's name on the news. Unfortunately, everything fell apart. Because soon after that, a recording of her and that medium circulated all over the university. People immediately recognized her and started gossiping about her. It had gotten so bad that Gina stopped going to school and finally confessed to her mom. Her mom was livid. this time much worse than any other time, and Gina eventually withdrew from the competition and dropped out of university. After that, Gina never took part in any beauty pageants ever again. So when Thea finished telling my senior laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "Damn, Thea, you know a lot about this. Were you under their bed when it happened?" Thea didn't laugh. She stared at her hands. "The story made it to our high school's web board back then," Thea said quietly. "Do you know who posted it?" My senior felt something cold settle in her chest. "It was me." Silence. "What?" "I posted the video. I shared it everywhere. I made sure everyone saw it." "But why?" Thea was Gina's best friend. "Well, maybe a best friend from hell." Thea has always been compared to Gina ever since they were kids. She had envied Gina for always getting beauty privileges growing up. No one cared about Thea. It was just Gina this, Gina that. It's always Gina, Gina, Gina. Whenever Thea liked someone and Gina helped to be a matchmaker, that Thea's crush would always fall in love with Gina instead. Teachers would focus on Gina and give preferential treatments to represent the school, even though Thea had excellent grades. And students would often compare and bully Thea, saying that Thea looked like a servant following Gina. So her hurt turned into jealousy over time, causing Thea to betray her best friend. No one knows what happened to Gina after that. Thea graduated, moved away, and as far as anyone knows, lived a normal life. But in Thai beliefs, dark magic always demands payment. Maybe not today, maybe not for years, but it always collects. Gina and Thea are pseudonyms. I changed their names for privacy. The Drain. We came back to empty the house, as if that were a task and not an intrusion. No one said the word clean because we all knew nothing there had ever been cleaned, only left to accumulate. My grandmother Maria had already passed away when we returned, and her absence weighed more than the furniture still left inside. My mother went in first, her shoulders raised as if expecting a blow, and my aunt followed behind her, counting steps she didn't say out loud. I stayed 1 second longer at the front door, breathing an air I didn't recognize as old, but as contained, as if the house had been holding something back for the exact moment someone touched it again. We went up to the second floor. We didn't say it, our bodies remembered the order better than we did. The stairs creaked in the same places, and that detail bothered me more than the silence. My mother touched the wall with the tip of her fingers, not to steady herself. She wanted to confirm it was still there. She knew. The air was colder than outside on the street, but it didn't move. It was a still cold that settled low in my lungs. "Do you remember when the power went out?" my aunt said without looking at us. "It was always at night," my mother replied. No one added anything else. We walked slowly, dodging furniture that was no longer there, and still our bodies avoided those sharp corners. I felt a light pressure in my chest, like when a room is full even if no one is in it. I thought it was just suggestion because of everything we lived in that house, until I saw my mother stop for a second, bring her hand to her sternum, and release her breath all at once, as if she had remembered something too quickly. It's almost funny to think how all of us went to the same place, without speaking, without looking at each other. Our bodies led us there, the blood pushing through our veins toward that room. The door to my grandmother Maria's bedroom opened without resistance, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. I expected stiffness, swollen wood, some kind of refusal. Instead, the room yielded. The smell was different from the rest of the house, cleaner, more familiar, and yet something was stuck there like an emotion that can't find a way out. I felt nostalgia before I even thought of her, but the feeling didn't come alone. Beneath it was fear. And beneath the fear, a quiet anger that had been forming for years, ancient, not mine, and yet it recognized me. My aunt stayed at the door. My mother took 2 steps in and stopped. I knew, without anyone telling me, that something had been understood there that was never explained. It wasn't a bright revelation or a clear scene. It was more like a total, uncomfortable certainty, like suddenly seeing an entire body in an X-ray, the house, us, and the damage aligned in a single image that left no room for doubt. The room was almost empty, but not uninhabited. There were clear marks where the furniture had once been, paler rectangles on the floor, solitary nails on the wall, and a low dresser no one wanted to remove because it didn't weigh as much as what it had held. When I opened the top drawer, the coins clinked against each other with a familiarity that tightened my throat. My grandmother kept them there so she wouldn't forget that something small was always needed. My mother picked one up, rubbed it with her thumb, and put it back, as if it still had a purpose in that dresser. We found normal things: a rosary without a cross, buttons that no longer matched, a handkerchief folded with care. That would have been enough for a clean, manageable sadness. But then something appeared that we didn't recognize. It was inside the bottom drawer, wrapped in a cloth that didn't belong to my grandmother, or at least I had never seen it before. The fabric was rougher, darker, and it smelled different. Not of humidity, of confinement. It was a small object, heavy for its size, and none of the three of us could say where it had come from. My aunt shook her head immediately. My mother held it a second longer than necessary, as if waiting for the memory of something to arrive late. I knew, without knowing how, that it hadn't been there before the house began to get sick. In the end, my mother threw it to the floor. "Later we'll sweep the floor and get this thing out of here," she said, looking away from it. Beside the dresser was the bed, and to the right of the bed was the corner of the wall. The air changed right there, not colder or warmer, but denser, as if it were harder to push through. I felt a sudden pressure on my shoulders, a directionless shove, and my heart answered with a force that didn't match fear. It wasn't panic. It was recognition. My mother stepped back. My aunt placed her hand on the wall and pulled it away immediately, as if she had touched something alive. I stayed still, an uncomfortable certainty growing from my stomach to my chest. That corner didn't belong to this room. It never had. It didn't fit. It was a piece from another puzzle, but something caught my attention, something in the paint on the wall, not because of what it showed, but because it didn't quite settle. In the corner, the color looked poorly set, as if it had been reapplied in a hurry. I brought my hand closer without thinking too much and pressed my palm firmly against a surface that should have been solid. The vibration was immediate. Not a visible tremor, but an internal response, muted, that climbed up my forearm and lodged itself in my chest. I pulled my hand away and pressed it again, this time with more force. The wall gave way just slightly, enough for the body to understand something before the mind found words. Behind that corner there was no weight. There was passage. I leaned in and brought my ear closer. The sound wasn't clear or continuous. It wasn't water or air or any recognizable noise. It was more like an accumulation of poorly extinguished breaths, something moving very slowly as if the space itself were being used. I pulled back and rested my head against another section of the wall. There everything was different, cold, compact, full. It returned nothing. "Come here," I said, not knowing why my voice came out so low. My mother was the first to repeat the gesture. She pressed the wall, frowned, and pulled her hand back with a discomfort she didn't want to explain. My aunt leaned her head against it next, closed her eyes for a second, and shook her head. "And this?" I asked. "What is this?" No one answered right away. "It's always been there, I think," my aunt said at last, more like a guess than a memory. "The thing is, my mom had the wardrobe right in this corner. There was never a reason to touch it or examine it." The explanation didn't calm anyone, because the question remained intact, vibrating just like the wall. If that had always been there, what had been happening inside all those years without us noticing? The first thing we thought about was the first floor. Years ago it had been completely remodeled, walls opened, pipes replaced, floors lifted. Today it was a commercial space with bright lights and clean display windows. If something like that had existed down there, someone would have found it. No one had mentioned strange cracks or voids or sounds that didn't belong. Everything had been in order. That led us to the next step almost without saying it. We began to go through the other rooms on the second floor, not to inspect them but to touch them, feel the wall, press corners, rest our heads just enough. It was a brief clinical inspection. Nothing happened anywhere. The walls returned cold, density, silence. They were walls the way walls are supposed to be. We returned then to my grandmother Maria's room with a feeling hard to name, relief and alarm at the same time, because what we had found wasn't scattered, it was localized. We measured with our bodies what we could see. The vibration didn't stay in one exact point. It spread horizontally, taking up a good part of the wall like a poorly sealed cavity. But when we tried to follow it downward, the sound faded. It didn't descend. It refused the floor.
Computer ready?
I lifted my head, brought my ear higher near the edge of the ceiling. There the space responded again, not with noise but with continuity, as if the emptiness didn't end in that room.
You ain't got no camera on that bitch, Aaron?
Up, I said, before thinking whether I wanted to know. This is coming from above. We stayed for a moment on the landing, looking upward without really doing it. That was when I asked, more out of necessity than curiosity, who slept right above my grandmother's room. My mother took a while to answer. She frowned, as if the image refused to come to her. I think it was the main bedroom, she said, without conviction. But I'm not sure. I stopped going up after a while. I nodded, because I myself had stopped going up very early in my life. My body had decided before my memory did. My aunt didn't answer right away. She had her hand on the railing, her knuckles white. Yes, she said at last, it was the main one. I looked at her, pure as a... She nodded once. She and Agustin slept there. At first, she said, almost whispering. Later he ended up on the couch, she added. She said she couldn't sleep with him next to her. We all knew that. The twins slept next door, she continued, her voice dropping a little more. The rooms were connected from the inside, but theirs didn't have a door to the hallway. The only door was hers. I felt something very close to anger, but without direction. I had always thought that in the end they had built a door for my cousins, for their privacy and their needs. So to get out, I said, they had to go through her room. Always, my aunt replied. That was when I understood why my aunt didn't want to go upstairs. It wasn't the house. It was the people she had been forced to remember inside it. My mother was the first to say we had to go up. She didn't say it firmly, but with that quiet stubbornness that appears when there's nothing left to lose. I nodded immediately. My aunt shook her head, stepped back, then again. We don't have to go up, she said. We already know enough. No, I replied. We know where from, but we don't know what. She looked at both of us, as if searching our faces for a valid reason to put her body back where it didn't want to be. In the end, she went up, but she did it behind us, keeping the exact distance of someone who wants to leave quickly if anything moves. The stairs to the third floor had a different sound, not louder, hollow. I climbed counting the steps without meaning to 16, and on each one I felt the space narrowing. We walked down the hallway toward Purez's room without stopping too much, but not quickly either. There was no order to respect. The accumulation had already taken care of filling everything. Dust layered thick, cracks in the walls like dry mouths, paint lifted and burst open from humidity and years. The smell was sour, old, insistent. At the end of the hallway, directly in front of us, was the door. I recognized it before we reached it, not because it was different, but because the body remembered its weight. Purez's room. We went in, and the first thing I thought was how much someone takes with them when they leave. A television, for example. No one leaves a television behind if they're in a hurry, if they're fleeing, if they need to start over, unless they don't want to take anything that witnessed them. There was also a plastic rocking chair, twisted to one side. The yellowed curtains hung heavy, so worn it seemed a minimal breeze could turn them to dust. Nothing there seemed made to stay clean. In a corner, a basket of clothes remained intact. It had stayed there, anchored to the room, absorbing whatever the air offered it. The mattress was bare, resting directly on the base. Gray, sunken, stained. There were brown marks, yellow ones, and a darker one, reddish-brown, that I didn't want to look at for too long. The image reached me before the memory. Eva, unconscious, her body surrendered after convulsions. Uncle Agustin crying silently, sitting on the edge, combing her hair with his fingers as if that could give something back to her. And Eva didn't convulse like someone who falls and shakes on the floor. She convulsed like someone responding to a war alarm that never shuts off. Pureza wasn't there. She was never there, always in the kitchen or out on the street, doing who knows what. To the right, the door that led to the twins' room was still there. We couldn't enter without passing through this one. We never could. I peeked in. The space was narrow, compressed. 2 beds too close to each other. A wardrobe that held more of Pureza's things than theirs. Wood bitten by termites, dust, tight cobwebs in the corners. But what weighed the most wasn't what could be seen. I thought of Esteban, how he didn't sleep. How he stayed lying down, hugging his pillow, begging for morning to come, trying not to take his eyes off his sister. Eva watched him from the foot of the bed, her eyes unfocused, her body rigid, her muscles ready to run. Vigilant. As if the danger didn't come from outside, but from something already inside the room, inside his roommate. I felt a horrible pressure in my chest, sadness, fear, an ancient pain that hadn't found a place to settle, and I understood that space had not been a bedroom, it had been a permanent state of alert, a place where growing up meant learning not to sleep. I pulled my head out of that room to begin the inspection. We moved together, touching the walls the way you touch someone who's asleep, unsure if waking them is a good idea. The hand went ahead of the body, and the head stayed behind, approaching only as much as was humanly possible and necessary. The horror wasn't in what we could see, but in what the blood seemed to recognize and want to avoid. When we reached the corner, we tried first at head height. Open palms, firm pressure. Nothing. The wall returned what was expected, solidity, cold silence. We lowered to chest height. The same. No vibration, no hollow, no response. Above, over our heads, nothing either. We tapped lightly and got a full sound. Normal. I looked down. At first it seemed the same. But when we stayed still, holding our breath a second longer, something else appeared. Not a sound, a force. A slight, insistent pull, as if something were tugging from inside without touching. Not upward, not sideways, downward. I knelt and then lay flat on the floor, stretched out like a board, my face too close to the wooden planks. The smell was different down there, drier, older. I pressed my cheek against it and closed one eye to focus. That was when I felt it clearly. Right in that corner at the bottom, there was something that didn't belong. A board set wrong, false, slightly raised at one end. The sensation was immediate and brutal. If it gave way, if I pushed a little more, something could swallow me. Not violently, patiently. Like a black hole that doesn't need to move to pull you in. I straightened up slowly, my heart beating out of rhythm. I looked at my mother and my aunt. Neither asked what I had found. They knew by the way I pulled my hands back, as if they had been lent to me and no longer fully belonged to me. That board wasn't there like that by accident. Either someone had expected no one to ever notice it, or had counted on someone eventually doing so. We looked at each other without saying it, and I knew it was going to be me, not out of bravery, but because I was already too close. My mother looked for something to lift the board and found a rusty hook, forgotten among bits of wood and dust. I slid the hook barely into the gap and pulled carefully. The board gave way without resistance, as if it had been moved many times before. It wasn't nailed down. It was just placed there. The air changed immediately. Something rose from below that wasn't the smell of humidity but a mixture. Wet fabric, old grease, rusted metal, and something thicker, impossible to classify. It wasn't a clean conduit, and I don't know if it ever had been. I lit it with my phone's flashlight. I didn't see a pipe, a drain, or anything like that. I saw an irregular space, poorly defined, with remnants stuck to the inner walls. It looked more like the architecture an animal would carve with its claws. A cave, a cavern, a burrow. I could see scraps of fabric, long, thin fibers like human hair. a dark residue that didn't follow a single direction but several, as if it had been pushed and returned over and over again. "That doesn't go down," my mother said without raising her voice. "That stays." I leaned in a little more. Among the remnants was something I recognized without wanting to, a piece of synthetic fabric, greasy, smelling of kitchen. It didn't belong to that room, nor to my grandmother's. That was when I understood, not as an idea but as a physical image. The chute didn't carry everything downward as gravity dictates. It leaked, returned, overflowed at the edges. What had been expelled didn't choose a destination. It went wherever it could. I thought of the wooden floors, the cracks, the bare feet, the constant cold around the ankles, the small bodies living above something that never stopped moving. Pureza, I was sure it was her, had given birth downward, believing the horror had only one direction, but the space didn't obey. The conduit didn't drain, didn't carry whatever she wanted to reach my grandmother's room and our entire floor. The conduit saturated, and when that happened, what couldn't go down began to rise. I inserted the hook into that hole and something gave way inside. It didn't fall, it stretched. A thick, dark substance clung to the metal as if it didn't want to let go, as if we were in the middle of a rescue. When the hook came back out, it carried with it a crimson thread, opaque, not dripping but holding on to the opening like a secretion that hasn't decided to die yet. The smell came after. It wasn't open rot. It was old blood. Blood that had been expelled without air, without light, and then stored for years. A deep, intimate smell, impossible to confuse with anything else. I wiped my hand on my pants by reflex and felt disgust when I realized it didn't come off. It had stuck, forming a warm layer that seemed to respond to movement. "That," my aunt said, her voice breaking, "that's a birth." None of us corrected her. There was no need to say her name to see her. My body understood the posture on its own. A woman crouched in a deep squat, feet firmly planted, legs open to the limit of pain. Her nails dug into the walls to brace the push. Her back pressed against the corner as if she needed that exact angle to keep from collapsing. She wasn't birthing a child. She was birthing discharge, birthing emotional residue turned into matter. Each spasm expelled something she couldn't hold without breaking inside. And the hole waited for her, not as an accident but as a destination. The conduit was there to receive, to suck in, to carry far away what she didn't want to bear, what she wanted to spit onto us. She did it with intention, with determination, with the certainty that if she handed her curse to another body, it would stop burning her from within. Each spasm relieved her body and condemned ours. In that moment, something hit me. Everything came in at once, without order, without permission, as if someone had pushed an entire wall into my head. The conduit, the leakage, the wrong direction of gravity, the vertical birth believing itself an escape and becoming a system, the house not as a container but as a network. And I understood there wasn't a single point of origin, but a body insisting for years on expelling what it couldn't metabolize. Eva didn't convulse from illness. She convulsed because her small body grew on top of a body that never stopped emitting alarm signals. Because the nervous system learns what the environment repeats to it, and that environment vibrated. That's why her muscles tensed before her consciousness. That's why she fell. That's why her body screamed when no one else could. Esteban wasn't nervous, he was a sentinel, a child trained not to sleep, to watch over his sister. To anticipate the spasm, the noise, the danger that came from inside. His insecurity wasn't weakness, it was the way his body had formed, had adapted. It was survival learned in a room where fear was more palpable at night, and there was only one exit. My Uncle Agustin wasn't a passive, silent, idiotic man like Pureza said. He was being drained. He lived with his feet sunk into a house that absorbed his will. That's why he didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't speak. He only cried in silence with tears made of air. Because every attempt at resistance was returned to his body as pure exhaustion. A man turned into a host. A zombie with his heart crushed by the same sharp-nailed hand that wore the ring he had given her. The animals didn't die from isolated cruelty. They died because she couldn't distinguish between care and discharge, because her hands offered affection and harm with the same indistinguishable gesture, because what isn't processed gets acted out. Enrique looked at her with anger and need, because he had grown up seeing the origin of the evil without being able to name it, because he sensed she was both source and victim at the same time, just like him. Because he hated what had contaminated him, and still, he recognized it as his own. Food was never food, it was bait. That's why it smelled of rot even when freshly made. That's why something in the stomach closed before the first bite. It didn't nourish, it captured. The marks on her own body weren't external attacks from demons, witches, and ghosts like she wanted us to believe. They were marks of the return. Her own residue crawling up from the floor, clinging to her ankles, climbing her legs, claiming her bones, her marrow, the uterus that would later give a new life, a new birth. Invading her genetic material. That's why the only thing she could give birth to was that. Because she was no longer the machinery the horror had hijacked to reproduce itself. She herself was the parasite. That's why the screams we heard on the second floor. And that's why those screams had no throat, because the throat was that hole connecting her room to my grandmother Maria's, like emissions from a saturated space. And the woman who cried at the foot of my bed didn't want to kill me. She wanted to be seen. I held my breath not out of fear of dying, but out of fear that she would know I wasn't fully contaminated yet, that I wasn't fully parasitized. That's why the puddles of water that sometimes appeared in the middle of the patio at dawn, and they didn't come from a broken faucet or a faulty pipe. They came from above, always from above, and that's why they smelled like sewage. That's why they appeared without explanation. Now I know why so many needles appeared in the corners of our floor of our house. They weren't lost. They were precisely placed like reminders, like thresholds, on a chair, on the mattress, inside the foam of my pillow. In the exact place where the body lets go. There I saw it whole. She gave birth downward, believing the horror had only one direction. But the conduit she had scraped out with her own nails didn't drain, it saturated. And when it could no longer go down, it spread. It leaked. It climbed up the walls, through the boards, through their sleeping bodies. It stayed to live with all of us. Pureza didn't flee because she had reached whatever goal she had. She fled because the system sent it back to her. I could say I always knew that Pureza did strange things, that there were rituals, habits, silences placed in the wrong places. But I never imagined this scale. I never understood it wasn't an isolated gesture but a whole uterus functioning for years. My grandmother Maria was the first to receive it all. Whether she died from that or from an illness that comes with age, I don't know. Maybe there's no real difference between the two. The body also gets tired of holding what it never asked for. That day we abandoned the house. Not the way you abandon a place, but the way you abandon an organism that is no longer compatible with life. We didn't clean. We didn't gather anything. We didn't choose what to keep. We never touched those floors or those walls again. We knew any attempt at order would be a lie. We talked about selling it and fell silent. Who would live there afterward? What would happen when the space closed itself again around other bodies? There was no longer a woman birthing her filth, but the cracks remember. The materials remember. We didn't know how much had remained or how far it had seeped. We also didn't want it to become an abandoned house that could be inhabited by some mortal clown. One of those houses time eats slowly, because time also works for these things. So we did nothing. The house stayed there. Not alive, not dead. An empty uterus no one dares to fill again.